Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Cuban Assassin podcast. I'm your host, Richie Acevedo, also known as the Cuban Assassin. Last time on the Cuban Assassin podcast, we started talking about my cousin Charlotte, who was taking care of my sister Cindy and myself while my mom was in the hospital. Now, even though my cousin Charlotte was very mean to my sister and myself when she was taking care of us, after my mom came back from the hospital and Charlotte had already moved out, Charlotte did get her life changed and got straightened out. She ended up meeting a guy, getting married, and having kids. So she was a devoted wife and a devoted mother. And then later on, she would get a mysterious illness, which she would pass away from. My sister Cindy and I never got to saw all that good side. We only have all the bad memories, which is a shame. But at least we had the comforting thought that she had a good life. And like I said, my sister Cindy and myself had long forgiven Charlotte for all that in the past. Now, Mom got home from the hospital, and she went and got Cindy and I from our Aunt Esther and got us home. Mom went back into her mother mode to take care of Cindy and myself. And in the meantime, our dad, Angel Acevedo, was still continuing to wrestle as the Cuban Assassin, and he was still looking for a tag team partner to team up with. Here's a match with Dad teaming up with Sweet Daddy Sicky.
The third match of today's card. So it's double tag team day here on Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. One of the teams now making their way into the ring area, and we're awaiting the second one, and I'm sure they'll get a different response than the first team in this, the third match on today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. We're still waiting for them. Okay. We're still waiting for the tag team. We're waiting for the tag team of Sweet Daddy Sicky and the Cuban Assassin in this, the third match on today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. And I'm sure, as you've heard over the past couple of weeks, the Sweet Daddy Sicky has had all kinds of things to say about how he's gotten the eighth wonder of the world, the Cuban Assassin, over here to wrestle in Atlantic, Canada. Okay, let's do the introductions now that they're in the ring area. Introducing, at 242 pounds, coming from Greenwich Village, Mr. Irresistible Sweet Daddy Sicky. And his tag team partner, at 237 pounds, coming from Havana, Cuba, the eighth wonder of the world, the Cuban Assassin. And their opponents today, at 220 pounds, coming from Quebec, Pat O'Brien. And his tag team partner at 224 pounds, coming from Portland, Oregon, Buddy Lane. Referee is Ron Gauguin, and this the third match on today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. Okay, we're having a decision as to who's going to start for the Cuban Assassin, and Sicky, it's the Cuban Assassin, the eighth wonder of the world. Okay. It's Buddy Lane and Pat O'Brien teaming up against Sweet Daddy Sicky and the Cuban Assassin. Third match action, today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. And as we indicated to you, two tag teams and two single matches. And the single match coming up has Steve Casey and Tony Russo. There's the tag, and in comes Mr. Irresistible Sweet Daddy Sicky. And these guys have been around the square circle many times before, as a tag team and as individuals. Now the fans getting on Sweet Daddy Sicky, Sweet Mama Sicky. And of course, Sweet Daddy says that He has promised Fidel Castro that the Cuban assassin would be getting a shot at all of the titles that are in the Atlantic Canada area, and that's one of the reasons he was able to get them here, is because all the champions are here in the Atlantic provinces on Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling, and that's why Sweet Daddy Siki was able to get the Cuban assassin out of Cuba. But Sweet Daddy Siki is having his problems against this young man from Portland, Oregon, Buddy Lane. But the match is not over until you have the count of 1, 2, 3. Buddy Lane knows that. And so does Pat O'Brien, who's now in. Well, the big news, of course, is that next week, it's Ric Flair here on Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. Ric Flair won the NWA World title, defeating Dusty Rhodes, September 1981. He lost the world title to Harley Race, June 10th, 1983, and won the world title back from Harley Race when he defeated Harley in Greensboro, North Carolina, November 24th, 1983. One thing that's written up in all the wrestling books about Ric Flair, he's a man who's willing to defend his title against any and all contenders. Ric Flair, the world heavyweight champion from the NWA, and he's the world heavyweight champion of, the better part of the world when you consider it's Mexico, United States, Australia, Canada. That is the only championship that goes around all of those countries, is the NWA World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship. Pat O'Brien working on the sweet man, Mr. Irresistible, Sweet Daddy Siki. Now watch the eighth wonder of the world, the Cuban assassin. He'll show you something new out every time, and he'll show you something old, and that's just plain, sheer determination and guts. And he's got all of that. Cuban wants a tag, but no way. Buddy Lane gets the tag from Pat O'Brien, and they're in to do their number against the Cuban assassin, the eighth wonder of the world. Body slam and a pin attempt, 1-2, and that's all. Sweet Daddy Siki's in for a tag. See what he can do with this young guy from Portland, Oregon, Buddy Lane. And as we've been talking, watching these matches, and oh, look at the pain on Sweet Daddy Siki's face. You can tell how much pain he's incurring. Receiving from the hands of Buddy Lane. A little hair pull, and he turns it right around. Sweet Daddy Siki, Mr. Irresistible. There's no I wouldn't pull hair. A very innocent look on his face. And again, the fans at ringside claiming a hair pull. Meanwhile, Pat O'Brien is trying to put the Cuban assassin out of the commission, and we've got a tag, and no, we haven't got a tag, but referee Ron Gauguin says, okay. Sweet Daddy Siki convinced them. Nice move by Buddy Lane. And the Cuban assassin and Sweet Daddy Siki teaming up on Buddy Lane, and they are a formidable tag team. There is certainly no doubt about that. Sweet Daddy Siki, promising Fidel Castro that the Cuban, any belts or titles that he won, he could take them back to Cuba. Sweet Daddy Siki says, I don't need belts or titles. I am the greatest. Buddy Lane and Sweet Daddy Siki. Tag, and in comes the Cuban Assassin. Third match action on today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. And you are seeing it, in-person fans, right from our television studio. The very finest in professional wrestling, and this is the very studio where last week, Big Stephen Pettipaw captured the European Heavyweight Wrestling Championship from the hands and the waist of Killer Carl Krupp. As we indicated starting off that match, not very often do you get an opportunity to see a heavyweight wrestling championship match on television. And to top it off, we had a young Maritimer, Stephen Pettipaw, walk off with the European Heavyweight Championship in a disputed match with Killer Carl Krupp. Killer Carl Krupp claiming his foot was over the rope. He's contacted the NWA and the European Wrestling Alliance. He's very upset and has offered $100,000 if he can get that match, another match with Big Stephen Pettipaw, to get his European Heavyweight Championship belt back, or at least get a chance at it. Pat O'Brien tags up with Buddy Lane, and referee Ron Gauguin did not see it, and he's not going to allow it. Meanwhile, Buddy Lane is going to take his punishment. Sweet Daddy Siki and the Cuban Assassin. And it's Buddy Lane taking an awful lot of punishment at the hands of the Cuban Assassin. And Sweet Daddy Siki. With the help of a little hair, Sweet Daddy Siki stopped Buddy Lane's attempt to get a tag. Buddy Lane from the canvas, decking the Cuban Assassin, but in comes Sweet Daddy Siki. Buddy Lane and Sweet Daddy Siki, and there's the tag. Buddy Lane finally gets a tag. And in comes Pat O'Brien. And again, referee Ron Gauguin did not see the tag and does not allow Pat O'Brien in. Buddy Lane now trying to get his tag. There's the tag. And I think he's going to allow this one. Pat O'Brien flailing away at the Cuban Assassin. Up and over goes the Cuban Assassin, and trying for the Boston Crab. But Sweet Daddy Siki has other thoughts in mind. Breaks that one up. We've reached the 10-minute mark in this match, the third match on today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. Just great wrestling action. The Cuban Assassin and Buddy Lane going for the abdominal stretch. But Sweet Daddy Siki comes in to break it up, and Pat O'Brien says, okay, let's get a few things going here. Meanwhile, Buddy Lane and Pat O'Brien are going to have the great ones meet at the center of the ring. The Cuban Assassin and Sweet Daddy Siki, and look out. Oh, right off the top rope. The Cuban Assassin dropped Buddy Lane across the top rope. Spin and 1, 2, 3. And that's it, in great pain, writhing in pain on the center of the ring floor is Buddy Lane, and referee Ron Gauguin's back was turned as the Cuban Assassin dropped Buddy Lane right across the top rope in a most diabolical manner. And again, as we've indicated in the past, the Cuban Assassin has not lost any of his meanness that he displayed when he was here before. We'll be back with our most false to curfew match in just a moment.
Mom was taking care of Cindy and myself, and then all of a sudden, the money that was coming in from Dad wasn't coming in like it normally was. And then all of a sudden, Dad came in because he had 2 weeks off and decided to take Cindy and myself to Puerto Rico to visit our family down in Puerto Rico. And this scared my mom because my mom thought my dad was trying to take Cindy and I from her, so she gave my sister Cindy and I both $20 each. In case something happened, we can give her a phone call and she'll make sure she'll find a way to get us home. But that didn't happen. Dad brought us back, and then this is where Mom and Dad started falling apart. This is when they separated, because Mom knew Dad was staying with somebody, and Mom was out trying to get a job so that way she can take care of Cindy and I, because there wasn't that much money coming in. And then little did Cindy and I know, but when my dad went to leave, this would be the last time we would see him, because once he left, it was over between Mom and Dad at this point. So when Dad left, I wouldn't see Dad until 1989. My sister wouldn't see Dad until 2013. Here's a singles match with my dad.
With a 20-minute time limit. Introducing at 232 pounds, coming from Havana, Cuba, the eighth wonder of the world, the Cuban Assassin. And his opponent today at 215 pounds, coming from Winnipeg, Chris Pepper. Referee is Ron Gauguin. Okay, it's second match action today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling, and this is a match that has a few people wondering. The Cuban Assassin. Now there's a man without a home. Cuban Assassin, after some actions that have taken place in the Atlantic Canada area, is no longer welcome in any of the wrestling camps that have been set up in the Atlantic Canada area. A man without a home. The Cuban Assassin. And particularly, the grudges between he and no-class Bobby Bass have turned into something else again. The Cuban Assassin, managed by Mr. Bass, but, well, that's all gone by the wayside. And there's war in the Maritimes. And I'll tell you, Chris Pepper is going to have war with the Cuban Assassin. Chris Pepper is not happy with some of the treatment he's gotten from the Cuban Assassin, and he's speaking about war. He's a young man that can create a war of his own. The Cuban Assassin can also create war. And he is known as a very tough customer. And Chris Pepper finds himself in the corner. And Chris Pepper says, if that's how it's played, let's do it. If those are the rules, then let's go. And again, the Cuban takes advantage of a situation and is able to catch his opponent a bit off guard, and, well, you saw the result. The Cuban Assassin using all of his experience to take advantage of Chris Pepper, 1-2, or just about all of 2. The Cuban Assassin and Chris Pepper. This match off today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. And the Cuban Assassin, a man without a home. Referee Ron Gauguin, trying to get a look at that hold, fans were claiming a choke on Chris Pepper. Well, the Cuban broke it up anyway with a knee and a fist. And when you get into the square circle with the Cuban assassin, you'd better be prepared to get down and get ugly. Because he only knows one way to go. Whipped into the turnbuckle. Here's Chris Pepper. And a right hand to the chin. An elbow smash. The Cuban assassin, showing why he is the eighth wonder of the world as he continues to dominate his opponent, Chris Pepper. This match, today's card of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. That's two. And no. Chris Pepper still has a little bit of life left. Sands now trying to get Chris Pepper going. An elbow does it for a bit, but look out. Off the ropes and into a double chop. 1, 2, and just a kick out at the last minute. Chris Pepper, a double chop on the wrong end of it, off the rope. Thanks to the Cuban assassin. The Cuban assassin working over Chris Pepper. Referee Ron Gauguin making sure that the hold is not a chokehold. 1, 2. And again, Chris Pepper still has enough life to keep it alive here in this match of Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling. Chris Pepper with an elbow and another one off the rope. Down goes the Cuban. And up goes Chris Pepper, but look out, the Cuban's gone. Count of 1, 2, and a kick out. And it looked like Chris Pepper had met his maker twice, going off the ropes, but the Cuban assassin not able to get that very important 3 count. And the Cuban now. A reversal by Chris Pepper on the Cuban assassin. Look out! The Cuban. Chris Pepper has some of his own to get back. Up and look out. On the neck breaker. That is a good finishing hold for the Cuban. 1, 2, and 3. That's it. That's all she wrote for Chris Pepper. The Cuban assassin with that neck breaker off the ropes, getting some extra leverage, and according to the fans, using the trunks to get a little additional leverage, and that's the end of the match. We're back with more wrestling on Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling in just a moment.
Since my mom and dad had separated and dad had left, Dad would only call and check on Cindy and myself every so often through the year and only send money on her birthday, my birthday, and at Christmas. So Mom got a job at a nursing home at Hilltop, West Virginia, and then she eventually would get a job at Morton's Oak Hill Taxi as a dispatcher and also a dispatcher for the Greyhound bus lines. So it was truly over between my mom and my dad, and my dad would be staying with someone else up in Canada. And while my mom was here at working, she would meet a new man. And this is where the new guy came in our lives, Donald J. Dempsey. Next time on the Cuban Assassin podcast, we'll be talking about some hard times in our lives at this point, as well as we'll be talking about the new man in my mom's life, DJ Dempsey, and I'll talk a little bit more about my Bigfoot experience. The Cuban Assassin podcast is produced, written, edited, and directed by me, Richie Acevedo, at Mountain Man Productions. Special thanks goes out to Ben Hilton for the opening and closing demographics of the podcast. Special thanks goes out to Renee Dupree and the Gauguin family for the wrestling matches film footage used in today's podcast. And special thanks goes to my late mother, Yvonne Dempsey, for all the pics and photographs used in today's podcast. You can reach me at mountainmanproductions@outlook.com, which is capital M for mountain, capital M for man, and capital P for productions at outlook.com, or you can leave a comment. We'll see you next time on the Cuban Assassin podcast.